So I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only if you're brave.
We're good? We're live? Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to tonight's living room. I didn't hear the music. I got a little confused about when we were starting. Welcome to everybody in the room, those of you watching live, those of you who will come back and watch post-live. For some of you who are new in the room tonight, welcome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. I'm Danielle Hicks. I am Chief Patient Officer here at GO2 for lung cancer, and I've been working in this space for about 19 years, always in the patient support and education arena. And this programming has been around since about 2009. It was, originally, some of you who are veterans to the living room have heard me say this a million times, and you've also heard me say, you've heard me say this a million times, but it really started bringing about 4 or 5 patients into this very room and just saying, what's missing in your experience? What do you need from us? How can we help you to better navigate, your diagnosis and everything that comes along with it? And the living room is what actually sprung from that. It's a monthly meeting, third Tuesday of every month, where we invite key opinion leaders to come in and talk to you about varying aspects of a lung cancer diagnosis. And I couldn't be more thrilled about the conversation that we're having tonight. Tonight's conversation really revolves around something that was near and dear to my mom's heart. My mom being one of the co-founders of the organization, who, we all know she passed back in August. And I promise I'm not getting emotional tonight because I'm not going to look at my sister who's in the room. But it was really, one of her driving forces is if I can help or even save one patient, then everything that I'm doing is worth it. And I know that, here we are 20 some odd years later, and we've grown and we've done so much more than that. But one of her passions was young lung cancer. And by young lung cancer, I don't mean to disrespect anybody who was diagnosed, maybe not at what might be considered a young age, but for lung cancer, it matters, and there's a difference. One of the early in the early days when we had first met a young woman named Jill Costello, I believe Jill was 19 when she was diagnosed, and she went to UC Berkeley, and she was the coxswain of the crew team. And this was before at least as many biomarkers as we know of now were even discovered, let alone had therapies that could target that driver, mutation. And my mom went out and was like, "Hey, we need to call the Wall Street Journal, we need to call the New York Times, and we need to spread awareness about, people getting with no known risk factors being diagnosed with lung cancer at such a young age." And there was nothing out there. And so. And this is, we're going to get to the meat of the conversation, I promise, but this started with, her just saying, as if lung cancer in and of itself weren't enough, but now we don't know anything about what lung cancer might look like in people diagnosed at that time under the age of 40. We've since upped that number. So through some efforts between then what was the Adarial Lung Cancer Foundation and the Adarial Lung Cancer Medical Institute, which is a sister research organization to ours, we ran a study looking at young lung cancer patients, specifically their genetics, their genomics. And through study, which has since been published, we found that people diagnosed, at these younger ages were, upwards of 85% likely to have these driver mutations, which is not the case in people who skew older or around the median age of diagnosis, which is about 71. So through that, several studies have followed, including Inherit, looking at genetics or familial potentials for lung cancer, as well as an epidemiology study. And I'm going to highlight the epidemiology study, which is, again, a follow-up to the genomic study, which has been going on for a few years now. And I'm highlighting it to say that we're currently digging through data and submitting abstracts because we think, we've got some exciting stuff to share from what we found through that study. So thank you to all of you who may be watching who have participated in either or both studies. With that being said, the meat of the conversation and what we're going to be talking about tonight is some unique challenges that are faced by people who are diagnosed at these younger ages. They're at different stages in life where they may be dating, they may be married with young children, they may just have a different set of, like I said, unique obstacles that they're trying to overcome. And I couldn't be more excited to have this conversation. So that was a very long-winded introduction and way for me to introduce the conversation tonight. We are, I see Stephen. Stephen joined. We are joined tonight, and I'm going to let them give introductions because I feel, as you guys all know, that reading bios tends to be a little bit impersonal as opposed to letting people just tell you who they are and why they're here and why it matters. So we have Leah Phillips, and if you're sitting here in this room and watching online, she's up there in the left-hand corner of the Brady Bunch squares, and she's a patient and co-founder of the Young Lung Cancer Initiative. Samantha Murrell, who's on the upper right side, there she is waving, she's a patient advocate. Stephen Huff, bottom right over there, and I met Stephen a long time ago. He is a father, husband, patient advocate, and founder of the Huff Project. And then Billie Jean Jones down there in the bottom left corner, last but not least, patient advocate. We had one more panelist, Ashley Vassallo, who's actually local here to Northern California, who's unable to make it tonight. But if you do not follow her on Instagram, her handle is @OneLungLady, and she's got some really fantastic content that she shares out with the community. So before we start, I'm just going to do sort of an around the horn with the folks tonight. And Leah, we'll start with you since you're in the upper left. And if you could just give us a brief introduction of who you are and why you're here tonight.
Sure. So thank you so much for having us. So my name is Leah, and I am from Louisville, Kentucky, and I was diagnosed at the age of 43 years old with stage 4 lung cancer with the EGFR mutation. At the time, I was a stay-at-home mom to 3 kids. My oldest just turned 14. I had a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old. And I didn't even know that I was at risk for lung cancer. And of course, there was a delayed diagnosis, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. And when I was diagnosed, it was very hard to find people that were young and talking about lung cancer. Stephen was one of those people that I could find, but there weren't very many. So that's kind of who I am. And then from that, myself and 2 other lovely ladies, one a caregiver and another patient, started the Young Lung Cancer Initiative not even 2 years ago. And what was supposed to be this little tiny thing that we thought would be local has really evolved to be a huge, tremendous community. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Leah. Sam, let's jump to you.
Hey everyone, Samantha Murrell. I reside in Park City, Utah. I know my accent doesn't sound like it, but I promise you that's where I live. I have stage 4 lung cancer with a HER2 mutation. I was diagnosed in April of 2024. I am an adventurer, outdoor enthusiast, love hiking, biking, just being outdoors in the wilderness with my dog. My husband is active duty military, so we've moved around a lot, and my career is mainly in public safety in that sector. So the reason why I'm here is I'm trying to build my following on Instagram to kind of shout from the rooftops that young people can get lung cancer. As Leah said, it was not on my radar as one of the cancers I could get. And now that I have it, I want to inform and educate as much as I possibly can to let people know that this is a thing in young people.
Thanks, Samantha. Stephen, you're up next.
Hey everyone. Hey Danielle, good to see you
Hey,
guys.
Stephen.
So yeah, my name's Stephen Huff. Sorry for being late. I'll tell you what, I'll fill you in on those details later, but yeah, just excited to be here. 29 years old, I was diagnosed stage 4 lung cancer, having a history as an athlete, former athlete. That was something that was never on my radar, which I would assume is the case for all of us, but the season of life I was in was sort of a transitioning one. I was engaged at the time and really just trying to start my roots and thinking about family planning and starting my second career and all these sorts of things. So really excited to share my perspective and hear everyone else's perspective here. And the Huff Project, I know Danielle mentioned that. That's an organization my wife and I started. Today we've raised close to $1 million, and we've just sort of partnered up with science research folks and tried to find, hopefully, a cure. So excited to be here. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Stephen. Billie, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Billie. I am the mother of an 11-year-old, brilliant 11-year-old who holds me to the highest standard that no person is able to reach, not even me. I am also a speech-language pathologist. I own Verbalized Speech Therapy here in Atlanta, Decatur. I'm from Atlanta. My private practice is in Decatur, Georgia. I was diagnosed at 40 years old, just 2 months after I lost my mother to metastatic breast cancer. That was her 4th time fighting breast cancer. So lung cancer never crossed my radar. I thought that if I would get any cancer, it would be breast cancer, seeing as though my mom had breast cancer 4 times. I also lost my oldest sister a day before her 37th birthday back in 2000 to stomach cancer. So I do want to go on the record to say that I absolutely abhor cancer and everything about it. It has done some terrible things just in my immediate circle. I have stage 3 lung cancer, and I have the ALK mutation.
Thanks, Billie. And I think, thank you all for sharing those quick sort of, high-level updates of who you are and why you're here. And as we're going through the conversations tonight, you're going to learn more about their experiences across, from, miss or delayed diagnosis through sort of where they are now and all the bumps in the road that are associated with that. And, I think, well, I'm not going to talk about what I think because I want to hear about what they think. So let's jump in and let's start with one of I think the biggest challenges that plagues this community of young people, and I could effectively say maybe healthcare providers alike, and that is the miss or delayed diagnosis. Quite often, even people of a young age who are symptomatic are given diagnoses other than a lung cancer diagnosis because people just aren't looking for it. They don't meet the perceived, criteria. So let's talk about that and why we think that is. And what I do want to say before we jump in is anybody who's watching online, Michelle Zay is moderating, as well as some of the other folks from the PSS team around the country. So if you have questions, please drop them into the comments, and we will make sure, if one is directed to one of the panelists, to get the question to them, and or the folks from the PSS team online will help to answer those. Same goes for those in the room. Please remember to pick up your mic. So let's start with diagnostic delays in diagnosis. Samantha, do you want to start with maybe what your experience looked like there?
Absolutely. So 6 months prior to my official diagnosis, I got a pretty bad blood clot in my calf. And I went to the urgent care about it, and they essentially just brushed it off as, oh, you've been traveling, and so that's why you got a blood clot. It didn't even cross my mind that it potentially could be a cancer-related symptom whatsoever, so I definitely didn't push there to find out more of an answer. And 6 months went by, and when I was finally admitted into the hospital and they drained 3 liters of fluid from my lungs, they were still dumbfounded. I had infectious disease turn up. I'd just come back from a trip overseas. They thought I had some weird infection. They were looking at me in a super puzzled way, just not understanding why I was presenting so somewhat healthy, very young and fit, and didn't understand why they were draining 3 liters of fluid from my lungs. I was fortunate where that original doctor that admitted me said, we need to figure this out, something is very wrong. So they kept me in the hospital, and over the course of a week, figured out that the diagnosis was indeed cancer. I know that is not the case for many other young people. So I was very fortunate to have a doctor that was advocating for me to figure out what was going on. But that 6-month delay of having a blood clot haunts me, honestly, because I've been told that potentially could have put me at stage 3, and then I could have been potentially curable. So it haunts me every day.
Yeah. Delayed diagnosis has devastating, implications with the treatment delays. Leah, how about you?
Similar. I started as a runner and a healthy person. I'm well-spoken in terms of I stand up for myself. And I went to my primary care physician when I started with a cough. Started at the end of August. At the beginning of September, I was at my primary care physician's office, and I was just diagnosed repeatedly. I was there every 2 to 3 weeks saying, I'm not getting better, and it was things like post-viral cough and allergies, exercise-induced asthma, anxiety, pneumonia. I actually had a 4-day stay inpatient for round-the-clock IV antibiotics, where I had a bronchoscopy done at the time, and the pulmonologist said, right as I'm going back, and I was there by myself, that they were going to look and see if there were any nodules or masses. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm here for pneumonia. And he goes, oh, don't worry. I just have to say this, but you're only 43 and you're healthy. And so I had that done. And 3 weeks later, I was readmitted because at that point, the pneumonia wasn't going away. And I started coughing up blood, and I was having pain in my right side. They drained 1 liter of fluid off my right lung. It came back malignant, which led to an 8-day stay in the hospital, very similar to Samantha, of racking their brains as to what this could be. We have a boat, or at the time we had a boat, and they had infectious disease in there. They thought maybe it was a bacteria I picked up in the water. There was all the things, and never did they think it was, until they found out that was malignant. They never thought it was cancer. And then when it was malignant, they did a bone biopsy and found out that it was lung cancer. And the interesting thing is, in November when I was admitted, I had a CT scan, and 3 weeks later I had a CT scan at the same hospital. And the one in November showed no lytic lesions, no bone mets in my spine, but the one 3 weeks later did. And so, like Samantha, you always wonder, had I been diagnosed when I was originally admitted to the hospital with that bronchoscopy, would I have been stage 4? And that's really hard to swallow when there's a big difference in, the staging of lung cancer between 1, 2, 3, 4. It runs the gamut. So I think it's very common because it's not on the radar. And I also think, a lot of young people don't have primary care physicians because, it's just not, a lot of women are using their OB as their, kind of primary care physician, or they're going to immediate care centers because you're moving around and you're working. And so you don't have that continuity of care. So I think it's very tricky sometimes to kind of isolate that.
Yeah. Thanks, Leah. Billie, what about you? Do you have a same or similar experience?
So my experience is a little bit different, but kind of same on the end. So really, to make a very long story short, back in 2019, my dad passed away. About 2 days before his funeral, I woke up. My heart was racing. I don't know what was happening. I had to get rushed to the ER. In the chest X-ray, we found a nodule. The doctor initially told me when I got referred to pulmonology that we were going to do a biopsy. If it wasn't cancer, we could go ahead and take it off, because if it turns to cancer, then obviously nobody wants lung cancer. But it would just be easier to take off 1/3 of the lung if it's there. So we did the biopsy. It was negative, no malignancy, but we agreed to go ahead and do the surgery. I had to schedule surgery. The surgery scheduled for March of 2020, and then COVID happened. And so all non-essential surgery stopped. And because it wasn't malignant, it wasn't essential. So we agreed to do scans every 6 months and biopsy yearly. And we literally did that until April 2023. April 2023, it had not changed in size. Nothing had changed. And so he discharged me. He was like, I think this could just be something that has been there forever. And I just think it's fine. So we'll leave it alone. And then, like I said, my mom died October 5th. Her funeral was October 14th of 2023. And I started coughing the day after. It had rained most of the week. People were in and out. And so I thought I just had a little cold. In December, I realized that I was still coughing. And I saw how much cough syrup I had taken. And I was like, something is wrong. I went to my primary care. He referred me to physical therapy. But my pain was I could not sit down. I could not lay down. Like, it was the pain in my upper back. If I sneezed or coughed, my daughter would have to come and like rub in my back to ease the pain of that. And so I talked to a friend, because the doctor just wanted to send me to physical therapy. I talked to my friend who's a physician. She said go back to him and make sure that he documents that he wouldn't give you medicine or anything. And I did, and he did prescribe me a muscle relaxer. I took the muscle relaxer. The evening I woke up, I was doing paperwork, and I coughed up blood. And of course, I had to go to the ER then. And I stayed there for about a week, and we did a bronchoscopy. And then I went back to work. So that following week, on a Wednesday, I got the call back from the cancer center.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, these are stories that we hear over and over. And so, I mean, we even hear them in people who, might skew older in age, this delay to diagnosis because people are, docs are busy looking for something else. Stephen, what about you?
Yeah, I was 28 at the time, and if I can remember back, I mean, I think my earliest symptoms probably started over a year before I eventually got my diagnosis. And I was transitioning from being a professional baseball player into coaching, and I had entered into graduate school, and I was just starting to have some weird shortness of breath. I wasn't active every single day like I was when I was playing, but I was still very active. I was running 3-4 days a week, exercising routinely, and it wasn't until I finished graduate school in early 2017, I moved back home. I had just taken my first job when I felt something in my neck area that was new and unusual. So I went and got it checked out. And to like Leah's point, I didn't have a primary care doctor. I was 28, going on 29, and really just starting my second career after playing baseball. So I didn't have a need, right? And that's really what caused my delays in going to see someone. Ultimately, I went in to get to an urgent care to get it looked at, and was told, hey, you're young, you're healthy. This is nothing, this is bronchitis. They did an x-ray, sent me on my way. The meds didn't work. So I was sort of scrambling again after that. I didn't have a primary to go back to. I didn't have anyone. I didn't think it was as urgent to go to ER or anything like that. So I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and he did another x-ray and said, no, actually it's pneumonia. And so rinse and repeat. We repeated this process every month for about 7 months. Next it was an ultrasound, and then it was blood testing. And ultimately it wasn't until probably, about 7 months from the first time I walked into an urgent care to the time that I eventually got my CT scan. And I remember leaving the imaging center and my phone ringing like 10 minutes after I left the imaging center. And I got basically told that there was some insane stuff going on in my body. So, I mean, I think it's very normal for to hear these types of stories and delays in care because, you know, lung cancer is the great master of many things. So a lot of the symptoms I was having were similar to that of thousands of other things. And I remember I was told at one point I had sarcoidosis because there's no way I could have lung cancer at 29 years old, let alone stage 4 metastatic. So it was, yeah, had I followed my intuitions a year earlier, to everyone's point, Samantha, Leah, we could, and Billie, we could all maybe got it earlier. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's so important about all of you sharing your story is to put faces and lived experiences, you know, to the diagnosis. I mean, we've all talked, you know, stigma continues to play a huge role in this disease and the diagnosis of this disease. I can't think of a single person who hasn't been asked at least once what, you know, when they tell someone that they have received a lung cancer diagnosis. Yeah, everyone you tell, yeah, asks if you smoked, and you know, my knee-jerk answer, you know, kind of feels like it should be like, what difference does that make? Like, I'm still a person. I'm someone's mom, sister, you know, aunt, uncle, grocery clerk, mailman. Like, it doesn't matter. And one of the things that I think is incredibly impactful about young folks telling their story in particular is sort of reimagining this sort of face of this disease and saying, you know, we kind of akin it, or I do, I shouldn't say we, to Ryan White in the AIDS epidemic, right? It wasn't until this young boy was diagnosed with AIDS from a blood transfusion did people stop sort of stigmatizing and started thinking, hey, anyone can get this disease. And I can tell you that these folks, particularly with their social media efforts, are doing stand-up job at bringing, you know, that to the forefront. I think also one of the things, even if not necessarily directly, but indirectly, it's creating a sense of urgency around better screening guidelines. Right now, you know, you have to be 50 years old and have a 20-pack-year history of smoking in order to get screened for lung cancer, and that does not work for a whole heck of a lot of people who are ultimately diagnosed. And I think, too, that implicit bias sort of plays a role where our healthcare providers have their own sort of preconceived notion about who they should be looking at for lung cancer. And these young folks are really stepping up and making people think twice before making those decisions. And anyway, kudos to all of you, and thank you for sharing that upfront experience. I think you guys all touched on the what if it had been found earlier, and would my diagnosis have looked different? And I think that is one of the most devastating things to think about in anyone whose diagnosis was delayed as long as that. To think if we'd have found it earlier, what might that have looked like? But you guys are amazing. So I want to jump into sort of number 2, which is really looking at the psychosocial and quality of life impacts. And again, I want to hear from all of you as we sort of walk through all of this. And since we started with you last time, Samantha, Billie, do you want to start and touch on how maybe this has impacted your quality of life, or sort of the psychosocial piece?
Yeah, so I say all the time as a way to honor my mom that I underestimated what cancer was. Like I said, she had cancer 4 times, and what I go through, I just didn't see her struggle like I'm struggling. And, you know, she could have just very well hid it, and, you know, that's what I think. But so I always try to honor her by saying that. I was just saying today that my anxiety has anxiety. I literally have anxiety about my anxiety. It changes everything in your life. Everything. I mean, you can't, for me, I can't even have like, no, I'm 42, so I can't have normal 42-year-old things happen without me automatically going to, oh my God, is the cancer spreading? Is the cancer spreading? I just spent this past weekend at the ICC, which is the emergency care for cancer care here. And I had some swelling in my neck, and it's probably from a tooth situation that I have, but all I could think about is it progressing? And so that has really become my life. And I know my anxiety is probably way worse than somebody else's. I had a friend tell me the other day, like, you need help. And she was telling the truth. And so I recently just went back on depression meds because it's taking control of my life. Like, that's all I think about is cancer all day, every single moment of it. Even when we were getting started, I'm sitting right here in my heart, I felt a little flutter. And I'm just like, what's happening? And am I like, it's the most terrible thing that I've ever experienced. And it has ruined my life in so many ways. I'm thankful for so many other things despite this diagnosis, but it has ruined my life.
Yeah. Yeah, Leah, thank you, Billie. Leah, I know when we talked prior to this meeting, you talked about emotional and sort of these mental health challenges. But you also talked a little bit about social isolation. Can you touch on a couple of those?
Sure. You know, when I was diagnosed, it was December of 2019. And rolls around March, and here comes COVID. It would shut everything down. So I got a real heavy dose of isolation. But I think what was most upsetting or shocking to me is the people that I thought would be there to support me and to, like, you know, rally around. A lot of those people were, but a lot of people, being that we were younger, couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle when I would tell them what was going on. They emotionally couldn't handle it. They didn't want their kids to be told that people that our age get lung cancer. It was a very lonely feeling. And when you would go out, and at the time, social media wasn't as big, you would Google it, and it was all gloom and doom, and trying to find someone to connect with that was your age or similar age was nearly impossible. And, you know, when I found the one person that was close to me here in Louisville, Elizabeth, we were 13 years apart in age, but we became best friends because we could talk about what was really going on. And I think socially, you know, like Billie says, it affects every part of your life. And at our ages, not just our life, our spouse's life, our parents' life, you know, your children's life. So it kind of, you sit there and you listen to people complain about things, and you're like, this is not a big problem. This is a small problem. And sometimes that isolation, I think, is brought on by myself, because sometimes it's hard to listen to people complaining about just silly little things, when I would give anything for my biggest problem to be, to me, not like my, you know, 9-year-old's math teacher. You know, that, you know, it really puts things in perspective.
Yeah, I think, thank you for that. And I think, you know, you talked a little bit about, you know, your kids. Can you talk about sort of the additional sort of stress that, I mean, not all 70-year-olds are, you know, Hugh Hefner and maybe have, you know, kids, you know, small children running around, but a lot of these young adult people who are diagnosed do, and you definitely did. Can you talk about some of the challenges that came along with that, including talking to your kids about what was going on? And that, I think, is a unique challenge to this sort of young subset of the diagnosed population.
And, you know, it was hard for me to stand up and say I have lung cancer when you do get that shame and blame. And, you know, when we told the kids that I had lung cancer, and we were trying to be, you know, with the age range, we were trying to not tell them too much. We didn't want them scared, but we also wanted to be honest with them. But we had to have separate conversations with each of them because of their ages. And, you know, my 9-year-old, he understood but didn't understand. And as soon as I started looking better and, in his opinion, feeling better, he would say things like, Mom, I'm so glad you beat lung cancer. And what do you say to that? Like, how do you say, oh, well, that's not the case? And then, you know, my oldest one, you know, he went home, he was 14, newly 14, and Googled lung cancer and saw all the terrible statistics. And he struggled with major anxiety. And, you know, I came home from the hospital and they wouldn't leave my side. They were wanting to sleep with me, sit on the couch with me. They were arguing who could sit with me. And really, how do you approach this? And these kids are carrying this burden along with them. And, it's just a whole nother, as a parent, it's hard to let like Billie said, I think my mom did experience these things. She was just hiding them. And I think as parents, we naturally do that because we don't want our children to worry. I think we also do it to keep our parents from worrying, quite honestly. It took a long time for me to be able to talk to my mom and dad about what was going on, because every time we talked about it, my mom and dad were upset. And as a parent, I can understand that, because all you want to do is make it better for your kids. So people in our generation, we're navigating both of those, not just our own, not just our spouses, but also our children and our parents, which are like, those people are the most important people. So, the conversation has to change with your kids as they grow, as you move down the path of diagnosis, when you have radiation, when you have surgery, when you switch treatments, because they're curious. And if you don't tell them, they're going to go find what they think is the answer. And it's not always the answer, the correct answer.
Yeah, the generational sort of dynamic is certainly something that is unique to this population. Stephen, how about you? I know you talked a little bit about being engaged at the time that you were diagnosed, and that has transitioned into much more than that. But I'm assuming some challenges similar to Leah's as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and maybe how you've overcome or chosen to walk through that?
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of really good points being brought up here. I could do a whole thing on toxic positivity, but the season of life I was in was starting my second life. I mean, I mentioned it a second ago. Up to my mid-20s, I had been, an athlete, a baseball player. That was sort of my identity. And as you can imagine, your identity is a lot of what your life has led you to this point. And up to that point in my life, I had really relied on my body to come through for me, right? I had really trained hard, exercised, taken really good care of my body. And then all of a sudden, overnight, it felt like that identity was robbed. And so I had a lot of soul searching. When I was initially diagnosed, I was engaged, and we had talked about starting a family. I was starting my career, and it was very challenging. Cancer is the great thief. Billie mentioned it, but it tries to rob you of the control that you feel like you have in your life and the direction that you feel like you have in your life. And when I sometimes catch myself remembering what it was like before I was diagnosed, retiring and growing old and seeing my kids grow old was sort of a forethought. I didn't have to think about, what that would be like. I just assumed it was going to happen for me. And so now it's really changed my perspective on how I view everything. I mean, the lens I live in is 3 months at a time. And anything beyond that is gravy. So really, starting a family for us was something that I had pushed back after I was diagnosed. And thankfully, with the grit and tenacity of my wife and having the hope that we needed at the time of my diagnosis, we were able to plan accordingly so that after about a year into my first treatment, we felt like we were in a good position, and we started our own family. So now here we are, almost 8 years later. No, actually over 8 years later, and we have 2 young, healthy babies. One is 5 and one is 2. My son, that's why I was late. I was coaching his baseball game tonight. So something that I never envisioned would be a possibility. And it's really a blessing. So
Thanks, Stephen. Samantha, you opened up earlier in the conversation talking about your love for the outdoors and hiking and being active. Has this diagnosis had an impact on you in that way? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the past 10 months, I've been on infusions, which essentially, the infusions are every 3 weeks, and for a week after the infusion, I am out. I cannot really function that well at all, unfortunately, and it has taken a massive mental toll on my well-being because I am that outdoor adventurer. I hike 40, 50 miles a week. I'm very much like an active person and want to move. Movement makes me happy. And so I see Stephen smiling there. And so being on the couch and being so debilitated is awful for my well-being. And in fact, so bad that I recently switched treatments, not because it stopped working, but because I wanted my daily life to be more of what I wanted it to be. So I took control, switched treatments, and now I can be as active as I want to be any day of the week. And that makes me very, very happy. But it very much taken a big mental toll on me not being able to do the things that I love.
Yeah. Last question, and this is to all of you, so feel free to take turns, or just if anybody has anything to say. When I think about, your ages and sort of where you are in life, and I think about where I was when I was in my 20s, when I was in my 30s, when I was in my 40s, as it related to not only my family and my children and my parents, but my career and what that looked like. And not that everybody needs to have these very, big aspirational career paths, but if you did, what, if any, impact did the diagnosis have on any of those career aspirations?
So for me, not to big myself up, but I was a big shot in the public safety space. I was in public safety, 911 in particular, and emergency management response for a while, and then moved into the private sector as a director of product for a tech startup. And my career was everything to me. I don't have my own children. I'm a stepmom. But my career was my baby kind of thing. And I was just going continually up and up and up, upward trajectory, trying to get the most out of my career. And when I was diagnosed, everything just fell apart. And it was devastating to me, absolutely devastating. I've been very, very fortunate where my current employer allows me to take the time to do all of my treatments, all of my appointments, and still work, and I'm still paid a full-time salary. And I know that's not the case for everyone out there by any means. So I'm very fortunate, but I no longer aspire to be the head of the head of the head person at the company. I no longer get extra certificates to try and upward mobility my career. So the entire mindset has completely shifted from this diagnosis. And while I'm quite comfortable doing what I'm doing, and I'm grateful that I can do what I love, the impact has been so great that I no longer have that trajectory that I wanted to do in my career and my life, and the aspirations that I had.
Thanks, Samantha. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll add to. Oh, go ahead, Billie.
Okay, thank you. So I'll say I had just hit my what I feel like my stride in my career. I felt like I had always lagged behind, simply because when I finished my undergraduate degree, my mom had cancer for, I think, the second time, and she had custody of my niece because my sister had passed away. And so I came home, and instead of going straight into the master's program, I worked 3 jobs and helped her and helped take care of my niece. And so I just feel like I've always lagged behind career as far as like my peers. And so I had kind of just hit my stride in my career. I've been a speech pathologist since 2010, but I had just got this office space that I had been running down for almost 2 years, trying to get this office space so I can start my own private practice. And I mean, I had just got the space in April. And like I said, my mom died in October. So I had taken about just that 2 months really for bereavement. But as soon as I'm headed back, it's like, oh my God. So of course, my diagnosis shut everything down. I worked from, I stopped working. So I only had my savings, which was probably I don't know, $17,000 or something. And then I had a friend who did a GoFundMe for me that raised about $12,000, which was magnificent for my income because I just fully lost income, and I did not work again until the following August. So I was out of work, I guess, 10-ish months. And now, I mean, I'm back in my private practice, and I love what I do. I get to wake up and do what I love every day and kind of be on my own terms. But even there, I'm still some days, because of anxiety, because of just life, I'm afraid. What if something happens if I'm here? So now it's like everybody knows where I am at all times, as far as it comes to work. If I'm in the office, I'll tell somebody, hey, if I don't call you in 2 hours, come find me. Don't let me lay here by myself. And so, I've started back, and I've kind of hit my stride again, the way I wanted to, but it's still that level of fear there. Like, what if this is just short lived? What if it's all my imagination, And so, again, it changes everything.
Yeah. Thank you, Billie. Stephen?
Just real quick, just to piggyback off that, I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said, especially in object emotion, Samantha. For me, it's idle hands or the devil's workshop. And the less I'm moving, the more I'm thinking about my cancer stage and disease state and all these things. So I was a teacher at the time I was diagnosed, and I was very much getting fulfillment, but I felt just a pool of purpose in a different direction that aligned more with sort of the charitable work that my wife and I do. So I had a friend approach me. This was 6 years into my diagnosis, and said, hey, look, I know that you really like teaching, but I think you would be really good at this. He worked at a medical technologies company and in the emergency care space, Samantha. And I immediately thought I was like, well, I can't change jobs because what happens if my disease changes? What happens if, I am with my health insurance? So going back to what I said earlier about that feeling of control in your life, you feel like it's almost like you feel like an adolescent again, and you're like, wow, this is a big decision. Like, I really have to think about, I have to get approval from, my disease state to move on to this different career opportunity. Ultimately, I ended up pursuing the new career opportunity, and it's been a great transition. It really, honestly, more than anything, it gave me aligned with more my purpose, what I feel like I'm here on earth to do, but also just independence from my disease state. And, I think the way that I perceive beating cancer is by how I choose to live my life, and might not be here forever, but at the end of the day, my goal is to live the life that I dream and aspire to be. So
I love it.
I change careers. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Leah, do you have anything to add before we move on?
So mine is a little different, as that I chose to stay home with our kids when they were born. I was a teacher, and in a Catholic school, private school does not pay like the public school system does. As we all know, teachers don't get paid a lot anyways. So it wasn't financially beneficial with childcare for me to continue to work, but I loved teaching. That was my passion. I'm a nurturer, I'm an educator, and I always thought that even if I didn't go back full time, but that when my youngest was able to come home on his own into the house, without assistance, that I would go back to something in that field. And of course, when he was 9, I was diagnosed, and the germs and the this, that, and that, and the other. And I've gone from kind of being at home and my focus being my kids, and then thinking I would focus back on the career or something, to starting a nonprofit, and something we thought was going to be really small, just mushrooming, and just growing. And now I have what my kids and my husband are like, you're working all the time, because they're not used to it. But it's a different kind of fulfillment. I think if I didn't have this, it would be, I don't sit still easily either. I was always on the go, had extra kids with me. If you don't have childcare, I'll take your kids, kind of a thing. So I've just channeled that educator, that natural educator, into my advocacy work. And I think that's true for a lot of people, that can't maybe continue on their career path. We kind of find new careers based on this experience. And, like Stephen says, somebody says, oh, I think you'd be good at this because, and, look where we are. So it's all about pivoting and being accepting of maybe not what you thought it was going to look like, but embracing what it is now.
Yeah, I think you all make really valid points. And again, sort of going back to what I said about, folks in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they're typically starting, and then like flourishing within their career paths. And when that gets cut off at the knees, there's a lot of things associated with that, right? You think around, particularly, not only just future goals, but financial considerations, right? And so part of what we've talked about, and we've talked about it here a lot in the living room, and this sort of runs across just, a lung cancer diagnosis or a cancer diagnosis in general, but the financial toxicities that come along with it, because cancer treatment is not cheap. And, people's insurance coverages vary. Insurance premiums are incredibly high. And when employment becomes an issue and maybe you don't have that type of coverage, that also impacts. So I want to talk a little bit about the financial burdens and how those might be unique in a way that, in a lot of cases, in a lot of your cases here, we're not just talking about paying for cancer treatment or maybe loss of wages or maybe not having the career path that you at once envisioned. But, when we're talking about, and Samantha, I don't know how young your stepchildren are, but Stephen and Leah, I mean, you're raising children. Children are also really expensive, and they get more expensive the older that they get. So can we talk a little bit about what that balance looks like, how you're managing it, and of course, any advice you have to give to the folks that are watching?
I mean, we're very fortunate in terms of my husband's insurance. My husband has always carried the insurance. So we have insurance, but it's not just the insurance. Even though we have good insurance, the last company my husband was with, we were told when he started that they would only pay $6,000 a month towards my targeted therapy, with a bill of over $18,000 a month. We were going to be paying $12,000 a month out of pocket for a life-saving drug. And did it mean that we couldn't feed our kids? No, but that taps into your retirement. It can tap into your kids' education. Everybody has to make choices and priorities, and the stress of the disease already, and then you add those things on top of it, whether it's, it affects everything. It affects whether people can go on vacation, whether they can pay their bills, whether they can get medical treatment, whether they can save for their future, whether they can save knowing that they may not be here to finish raising their children. It's just the financial, it doesn't matter how little or how much money you have, it definitely affects your financial plan, what you thought it was going to look like. And, I think for most people, they're trying their best. Everybody's trying their best. Everybody's making their best choices and, trying to prioritize that. And it's unfortunate that, plans have to change, and, not just your career change but it's, how you spend your money and what you prioritize definitely changes as well.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it's not, just because you have insurance doesn't mean that those bills don't still pile up. Stephen, do you have any thoughts here? And Samantha, you're next, because I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, I was diagnosed around the time where biomarker testing was iffy on insurance coverage. And I do remember, at least for my first biomarker test, getting a massive bill that was probably more than I made in a year as a teacher, and having to get basically Congress to sign off on getting this covered. And that was very strenuous. I mean, think about it. You're going through a diagnosis. You are, processing everything that comes with this diagnosis. I feel like I'm going to not be here in 6 months. I'm engaged. I have, my life has gotten turned upside down. And then, oh, by the way, you owe us, $30,000.
That was my first bill.
It's insane. It's, to add insult to injury is an understatement. And so I've been through, career changes where there was a drop at the handoff of insurance, so I had to pay for an MRI and then get reimbursed. I've had instances where my pharmaceutical coverage changed from my local, specialty pharmacy at the institution where I'm going to a private sector, and I had to pay for 2 months of my medications, which was more than I made in 2 months. And so, I would just say that the financial burden and toxicity of finances is something that should be an afterthought, when you're going through this disease, and any improvements that can be made in this area desperately needed. And so, I would just say that it's something that everyone goes through in some form or fashion. With young kids and being in where we're at now, we're really cognizant of like, hey, we're going to save as much as we can. We're going to set our kids up, set my wife up if anything were to ever happen to me. So we've gone out and met with financial advisors that are empathetic with our situation. They understand our goals, our financial goals, and it has put a ton of peace of mind at where we are financially. If something were to happen to me, something were to even happen to my wife. And so, I would just say, if you have a friend or know of someone, there's a lot of good people out there that want to help cancer patients and families of cancer patients. So.
Thanks, Stephen. Samantha?
Yeah, the big thing that I've been dealing with recently that I think is an important topic is, I'm working full time right now. I'm as healthy as I can be. I'm able to work. I'm grateful for that. But there's going to be a point realistically when I'm not able to work anymore. And so I looked into our short and long-term disability insurance, which I'm very grateful for that my company pays for that. I would say to the audience, like, if you are able to work now, look into those to see if your companies do have those insurance policies, because they're very important to know about. And I knew we had them, and I kind of just assumed, okay, well, when the time comes, I'll be good, I'll be covered, what have you. And only recently I looked into the fine print and all of the details. And it's like I think for me, it's like 60% of my salary. That's a dramatic cut, very, very dramatic cut, and life-changing, quite frankly. It would mean a lot of changes and very big impacts on us as a family. And so that gives me so much anxiety that there's going to be a point where I have to stop working and we're going to be taking such a massive hit. I am the breadwinner of the family, and it's going to be detrimental to us. And so I would say to the audience, like, look into your policies for your company and look at the fine print, and based on the fine print, make some other planning and plan accordingly about the what if kind of situation. Excuse me, it's what if situations, because that really shook me a few weeks ago, and now we have to start planning all over again.
Yeah, I think it's, unlike people who may be diagnosed at older age where they've already retired, haven't had decades to plan for retirement, including, feeding 401ks and the like for your future. So that's not necessarily something that's there. And I can't imagine having to even contemplate, well, my children's future college educations or my life-saving medication right now. Like, what does that look like? Billie, do you have anything that you want to add?
Yeah, this one is very unique for me because prior to the cancer diagnosis, I didn't have insurance because it was just easier to go to my annual appointment and pay out of pocket. I wasn't sick, and so I didn't have like medical bills or anything. And so when I first got my diagnosis, because I had to stop working, I was eligible for charity care. So at my hospital, they paid for a lot of that. And then I went to an ineligible status because I started back working. But what I found, and I probably shouldn't say this out loud, is that I have to juggle between not working a little and working a lot to be eligible for like charity care. Because if I get an insurance, I'll be required to pay $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 on a $19,000 med. Can't pay $6,000 a month, and that's just the cancer meds. That's not all the other meds that you have to maintain the cancer. And so I find myself honestly like juggling, and even like now I think I owe the hospital about $27,000, and I look at it and I'll say, hey, I'll give them $50 a month, because otherwise what can I do? And then I think something, I don't know if it's affected everyone else, but for me, and this is a touchy one, because after chemo and radiation, I had a lot of stuff to happen dental, like a lot of dental things. So my teeth are terrible after chemo and radiation. They break. I was sitting at a concert and my tooth just popped. And so I've gotten like three different medical opinions, and I have a dental treatment plan that's about $30,000, and I can't afford that. I can't pay that out of pocket. But I'm a speech therapist, and I talk to people every single day. So I have a lot of confidence, but this is the one thing that can literally break me down to tears. I cry about it weekly, but I need my teeth fixed. And so I think when people think about cancer, they think about chemo, they think about radiation. They don't think about what you need for the nerve pain and what you need because of dental stuff. Even now, I have so many broken teeth, like I'm chewing on the front of my mouth. It's bad. Like, I'm having headaches because of the holes in my teeth. And so people see that surface stuff and they don't know just how deep it goes, because of the money part of it, the financial part of it. So it's bad for me, on that side of it.
Yeah, and I think, I've had, like I mentioned, I've been talking to people diagnosed for, the better part of 20 years now. And Billie, your story is not unique, sadly. Having to field calls from people who can't afford the gas to drive to where they need to go to get their treatments. It is a huge, huge, huge challenge, barrier, gap. This is the part where if we had like a bleeper, I'd probably use a bunch of inappropriate words, because it really, really, really infuriates me. It's unjust. And you're absolutely right. It's not even just about college. It's about keeping the lights on. Like I said, it's about affording the gas to drive the 30 or 40 miles to your doctor's appointment, particularly people who live in more rural areas. And I think, again, bringing awareness to this and that some of the challenges that are faced is such a huge piece. And we're not done. I just want to take a moment to thank you all for sharing these stories that are so deeply personal but so important, to get the word out about it. And I am being mindful of time. And we had already said when we had our sort of pre-call to this, we're probably going to need a part 2, because there's so much to talk about. What I do want to talk about now, because we did have to skip a couple of things, but I want to talk about something that we touched on a little bit at the beginning, and that's the role that this sort of age demographic is having in this space. And when I say that, as generations sort of age up in diagnosis, and social media is not something that's foreign to people that are diagnosed, and as technology and certainly AI, starts to play a role in this, your generations and those that will, unfortunately come after you, are really the ones that are, in my opinion, sort of taking the bull by the horns from an awareness perspective. And I think you guys play a huge role in, as I said earlier, reducing stigma and really putting a face, and it could be anybody's face, to a lung cancer diagnosis. And Leah, the Young Lung Cancer Initiative, I think a lot of stories here sort of roll up into the work that you're doing. I've seen all of you on social media, and I couldn't be more impressed. But can you talk a little bit about what you've even seen in the short amount of time that you guys have been running this? What you've seen happen there?
It's been a big change because, social media, you can find people that have any interest in the world on social media. There's a niche for everyone. And when we started Young Lung Cancer Initiative, there wasn't a niche for young lung cancer patients out there. And, you would catch a little thing here or a little thing there, but there wasn't a large community of patients supporting other patients. And, when we started this, Lindy was over 50 when she was diagnosed. Bianca was a caregiver, so it became my face and my mouth just running, basically telling my story and being just, it took me a lot of years to get to the point where I could openly share without the emotion like overcoming me or without the shame that the stigma brings. And, little by little, we started finding other people that say, hey, listen, I'll share my story, and we were so thankful, Samantha was one of the first that said, let me share too. And, we collaborate with one another, we tag each other in things. And now we're getting daily, Bianca and I get multiple outpouring of questions. Can you help us? How do we do this? Because they're seeing our information out there and they're feeling comfortable standing up and saying, I need to advocate for myself. And we're bringing information into patients' hands in short snippets. And that's what busy people need. We don't have time to research for hours and hours, but in Carpool Line, we can watch a 3-minute video or a minute and a half video. And then that's going to link me to Steven's video. And that's going to link me to Billie's, and then Samantha's. And that's how people are getting the information. They're knowing the questions to ask their doctors. They're knowing if you don't feel comfortable with the care you're receiving, there's other options. And I think it's also a huge picture of hope for people, because when you're first diagnosed and they give you those gloom and doom statistics and you're thinking my life is over, all you need is like 1 or 2 people that you can say, look where they are, look what they've come to do. And there's a huge kind of change in tides in the way lung cancer is treated in younger people. It's no longer monotherapy for most of us, it's consolidative therapy. So it's not just the TKI, it's not just the chemo, it's not just the immunotherapy, it's also surgery and radiation. And to see and be able to watch someone who's walked through it. Samantha and I were just talking about this. She's having surgery, ironically, the same surgery I had on the same day a year later, to the day, October 29th. And, it gives people hope that you can watch that and be part of their journey and see where they're going and where they've been. And, I think it also sheds light on the sad parts of it too, the hard parts where we follow patients and all of a sudden they're not doing well or we lose them. But it's the reality of it's really the reality of our life and what we're living.
Yeah. Thanks, Leah. Samantha, how about you?
So I really started speaking up about things on social media because I wanted people to feel less alone, feel like they had other people to relate to. I'll be the first to say, like, when I was first diagnosed, the Young Lung group was the first group that I ever found online, and instantly felt a bond and connection with everyone in that group. And it was incredible. And I felt less alone. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I can do this on my social media platform too. And I, weirdly enough, concentrate on I show positives, I absolutely do, but I also want to show people the things that maybe people don't want to showcase on social media, whether that be me crying in a corner or being super anxious after a scan, and being really, really vulnerable and showing people that these are the emotions and experiences that I go through, and I'm sure other people do too. You're not alone. There are other people like you. So that's really why I started doing it. And it's helped me mentally as well, very much so, just as much as I believe it's helping other people. But I think social media is a massive part of bringing this group of people together that really, I'm sure when they're first diagnosed, feel very alienated, very isolated, and very alone. And this is kind of the way to bring everyone together. I like to call it someone's tribe, someone's bringing together a tribe of people that you can all relate to each other and understand each other. Because even if you have the best support system around you, family-wise and friends-wise, they're not truly going to understand what you're going through, unlike these people.
Yeah. That shared lived experience is incredibly meaningful. Billie, how about you?
So yeah, it just depends. I've always been a very transparent person about pretty much everything. I think that my gift is connecting to people, and so I share. I'm very, again, like I said earlier, confident with who I am. And so once I got the diagnosis, I immediately share. And one, because I was afraid, I was scared, I didn't know what to do, I needed some help. And so connecting with other people, or sometimes like people will inbox you, just like they said, you'll get inboxes from random people just sharing, pouring out their stories, and it tells you then, like, oh my God, somebody else is feeling this exact. I mean, you know it, but hearing it and seeing it is something totally different. And I think when I spoke with Leah, when I did the interview with them, and I said how I had a friend who said, well, I'm glad you don't talk about cancer all the time, or you don't make this your life. And I'm like, but this is my life. Like, every single decision I make, from waking up to going to sleep, has cancer somewhere on my mind about it. Like, I can't just, even traveling, everything, everything. And so I share, I tell, I think that people put a face to cancer, and especially, like I said, after seeing my mother and my sister pass away from cancer, people think that there's a look to cancer, and and I tell them it's not. And so that's why I think it's also important to share on social media, like, we can look normal, and I don't like the word normal, but and so I do try to share as much as I can about it. I tell my friends about it. They take and tell their friends things about it, and so it's been a way to connect to people. And like Samantha said, I found young lung cancer. I think that was the first when I first got the diagnosis, and went on Facebook to look for a support group, and it has been the biggest blessing to me.
Oh, I love that. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing. Stephen, you're up.
I mean, it's hard to say anything that hasn't already been said, but I'll share a little bit about, like, when I was first diagnosed. I remember exactly like what Leah was saying. I looked on the internet for hours. I tried to find someone that was young and had beaten or was beating lung cancer, and it was really hard. It all I needed was some sort of hope, and the fact that, like, Leah and all the great work at Young Lung, and what you do as well at GO2, is like, it's amazing. It gives people so much hope, so much energy. And I mean, like Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. So having being able to see someone can change your perspective, can change your attitude, can change your mentality. And I remember sitting in my oncologist's office. This was in 2017, and I remember talking to her about lung cancer and my survival, and what does that look like for me. And she explained to me that this is when I first learned about the stigma of lung cancer. And she explained to me that because people have associated it with smoking, it's underfunded, very underfunded relative to the amount of people that die from lung cancer. And I said, well, why is that? And she educated me on this. And I thought that was grossly unfair. I mean, exactly like you said, Danielle. Like, the first thing that you pops into my mind is like, did you smoke? Is like, does that matter? So I went home, and I told Emily, my wife, I said, we're going to start a charity. We're going to do events. We're going to tell our story. And the reason is because we need it. Lung cancer patients need it. They need to know what early symptoms look like. The fact that you can be young and get lung cancer. The fact that you don't have to smoke to get lung cancer, or all these different things like that I was processing at the time. And that's really what started my passion for social media and sharing our story, and trying to make sure that people know that they're not alone out there. And one of the things I'll finish on this one. One of the things I get reached out a lot about is starting a family after you get diagnosed, and what does that look like? And at the time, this is in 2019, I was 2 years into my diagnosis, 2 years into my treatment. We were going to start a family, and a lot of people were like, that's kind of crazy. Are you sure you're going to do that? Like, and we did it. And I can't tell you how many messages I get from folks all across the country and the world, just picking my brain about it. And then follow-up messages a year later or 2 years later. Hey, we just welcomed our first or our second or whatever. And so it's really inspiring. Those are the moments that, give people hope. And I'm just glad that there's so much energy in this space now, with all of us sort of sharing our stories. So
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. The one sort of bucket that we didn't get to was the effects of a young diagnosis, the effects that they have on relationships, and whether that's dating, whether that's spousal, if your spouse suddenly has to become your caregiver, how that changes the dynamic of sexual health, of family planning, fertility preservation. And a lot of these things aren't conversations that you're necessarily having with your healthcare providers. You should be, or they should be with you, but quite often those things don't happen. So maybe a part 2 we can include that. I know we've got different time zones on here, so I'm trying so hard to be mindful of it, but I've just loved hearing everything that you've all had to say. So if we could close out just quickly, and we'll do a little around the horn, like what do each of you, most hope people will take away from this conversation tonight? Samantha.
Oh boy, so I'm put on the spot first.
Sorry.
Okay, no, you're fine. I would say the biggest thing is that you're not alone. There is a connection of people, whether that be through the Young Lung Group or another association, where you can find people that you can relate to and have those shared experiences with. It will very much make you feel way less alone, and I encourage people to find those groups.
Thanks, Samantha. Billie, how about you?
So I'm going to have to agree with Samantha that you're not alone. So that's one thing. But on the flip side, so for people who are dealing with people who has lung cancer, be there, be supportive. Now, I can't say that my people aren't supportive. I have the most amazing people in the world. When I tell you, like, I never imagined, I'm speechless. And so it doesn't apply to me, but be there, just be there. I know it's scary. It's scary for you, but imagine living this life. It's scary for us every single day we wake up. So I know when Leah talked about like isolation, and sometimes people pull back because they are afraid. I have family members who won't even say the word cancer. They call it the C word. And I get it, but it's much harder and scarier on this side. So just be there, be supportive. It goes a long way. And I'm not talking about giving. I'm talking about a simple check-in. Hey, I thought about you. Hey, just anything. And so try to be that person to anybody really, but definitely to a patient with lung cancer. That would be my advice.
Fantastic. Thanks, Billie. Stephen.
Yeah, I'm going to quote a dear friend of mine that we lost a couple of years ago, Mutter Stars. Gina Hollenbeck used to say that quite frequently, and I remember asking her what that meant, and she's like, Stephen, this disease can make you feel pretty bad at times. Obviously, I'm not sharing anything new here, but if it's even if it's just getting out of bed and taking a shower, keep moving forward one step at a time. And that always sort of resonated with me. It's not a matter of, having the best day ever every day. It's just a matter of trying to have a better day than yesterday, and then maybe a little bit better day. And you can even break it down to have a better afternoon than you had in the morning. And I'll couple that with just giving yourself grace. A lot of times I try to put on a face of positivity, and nothing gets to me. I'm gonna beat this. How you doing? I'm doing great. When the reality is I'm hurting inside. I'm anxious. I'm worried. It's okay. It's okay to feel all those things. And at the end of the day, I just try to make sure that no matter what, I'm always looking forward, and it's okay to be in those low places. Just try not to live there forever.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for that reminder about Gina and her ever fighting and positive spirit. I mean, she carried that wherever she was. That is absolutely for sure. Leah, how about we close out with your final thoughts?
I think the biggest thing to take from this is there are people out there. Like everyone is saying, there are those of us that are, putting our stories out there. We want to help and kind of mentor people through this. And the other thing is when it comes to hope and you hear your diagnosis and you look up the statistics, and we are labeled, I think all of us have, if you've looked at your my chart enough, it says terminal diagnosis, palliative care, and that is a big, big blow. And, my first oncologist at Vanderbilt said to me, I can only tell you statistically about 2 years, but all you have to do is make it to the next day, because every day you make it to, you're just one step closer to either the next best treatment, the next best, maybe even a cure. And it's true. Like if you focus on the big picture, sometimes it's very, very anxiety giving and causing. But if you can just focus on just one day, the next day. And I always say, like I try to live my best life one day at a time, if that means that it's, sleeping in one day, that's the best. Or if it's taking my kids to do something, that's the best. It doesn't have to be the big things. It could just be the little things. And, and I agree with Stephen, give yourself the grace and the space you need to grieve, because it is a grieving process when you're handed this disease, because you're grieving the life that you thought you would have and all that comes with it. So just know there are people out there. GO2 is a great resource. Young Lung Cancer Initiative is easy to find. The Huff Project. I mean, there's just tons of us out there rallying. You just, sometimes we can't find all of you. You've got to find us. But once you find us, we're there.
That is the truth. You're stuck with all of us once you find us. That's for absolute sure. Thank you guys so much. Beautiful way to end this conversation with all of your sentiments. I could not agree more. And I couldn't be more appreciative for you guys taking the time, especially because I know it's getting super late for some of you. Stephen, I hope your son won, or hope your team won, and that you coached them to a championship somewhere down the line. Thank you all so very much.
We left it all on the field.
Yeah, right. I do have to do a little bit of housekeeping. So our next Gathering Hope, for those of you who might not know what that is, it's an online sort of just like roundtable conversations. People just having conversations with one another about whatever might spark at the moment. That is the second Tuesday of every month, and it's hosted by Michelle Zay, and that is on November 11th. Our next Living Room is November 18th. We have Dr. Lydia Shapira coming from Stanford. She will be here in person at our next meeting, and we're going to be talking about survivorship, and not in the way that you might typically or traditionally think of survivorship, but really this guide to long-term health and living with a lung cancer diagnosis and what that looks like. And it's going to run a spectrum. I have seen her speak. She is absolutely incredible and super passionate about this piece that's oh so important and quite often not discussed or talked about. Thank you again to all four of you, Leah, Samantha, Billie, and Stephen. Ashley, if you're watching from home, we miss you, but we're sending big healing thoughts and prayers. And next time, we already decided we had to have a part 2, so hopefully you'll be able to join us next time. All of you watching live, those of you who will come back and watch post-live, Penn Media for their tireless efforts pulling together, basically setting up a film set in this room once a month. Michelle Zay, again, for moderating, the rest of the PSS team who might be also moderating online, and the whole GO2 team in general. I would be remiss in not thanking our supporters. So Abbvie, Amgen, AstraZeneca, Bayer, Boehringer, Ingelheim, Bristol Myers Squibb, Foundation Medicine, Genentech, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Novartis, Novocure, Regeneron, Revolution Medicine, Summit Therapeutics, and Takeda Oncology. Without their support, and that's a really long list showing that they too see the value in bringing these types of conversations to you and anyone who joins us. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I will see you all next month. I will see some of you before then, but have a wonderful evening. Thanks, everybody.
So I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only if you're